I don't know about you, but I've been feeling a bit down in the lead up to this Christmas, and it's really all because of COVID-19. A couple of weeks ago, things were really kind of looking on the up, weren't they? Indeed, as a church, we were able to have more people come and sit in the building. We had, for a while, two groups meeting at the same time, one at the school and one here. We were able to bring them together and we were able to sing. It was great. And then, bang, the cluster happens up on the northern beaches. And, well, we've got less chairs in here now. We actually can't sing indoors, so when I finish speaking, we're all going to head out and stand outside so we can sing carols together, because that's the only way we can do it at the moment. But today, our family had plans too. The plan was for my dad, who's now in aged care, to come out and to come to our place and to have lunch and dinner with us. But he can't now. He's stuck in there. But my mum and I can go and visit him, so at least we've got that. But my sister, who was going to come over for dinner, well, she just happens to live in the northern part of the northern beaches. You know that area that no one's allowed into or no one's allowed out of anymore? So she can't come over. And I feel particularly for my nephew, my sister's youngest son, who lives in the southern part of the northern beaches and now can't go and visit his parents for Christmas. So all those kinds of things leave you feeling a bit deflated. And if you're anything like me, you're probably hoping that this COVID-19 vaccine or vaccines really hurry up getting here and that they actually do work, as the trials seem to be indicating, that we can develop some kind of herd immunity and that things will come back to normal relatively quickly. And that next Christmas we can all do the things that we're used to doing again. You see, here's the thing. Even if these vaccines are particularly effective, they're not going to deal with the issue of illness generally. Illnesses will continue to occur. Sicknesses will continue to occur. You see, our scientists and researchers have done wonderful things in eradicating many illnesses, but every time you eradicate illnesses, others just seem to emerge. And we never seem to be able to deal with this problem of sickness. Sickness always plagues us in different ways. Aging continues to plague us in different ways. And ultimately, we all face death. And it doesn't matter how wise our researchers are, how wise our doctors are, no one seems to be able to deal with this problem of death. It all sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? But you see, friends, as we come to Christmas, we celebrate the birth of someone who has the power to do that which we are powerless to do. We are powerless to deal with sickness. We're powerless to deal with aging. We're powerless to deal with death. But the one who was born on that first Christmas day, the Lord Jesus, he has the power to deal with those things for us. Now today we're going to focus on Matthew chapter 8 verses 1 to 17, our fourth reading this morning. And you might think that's a bit of a strange reading for Christmas Day. But friends, given the context that we're in at the moment, I actually think it's highly relevant. What we actually discover in this passage is that Jesus showed himself to be a great healer during his earthly life. The one who was born in Bethlehem on that first Christmas grew up into a man who performed amazing healings. And there's a couple of things that I want to say about Jesus' power to heal. First of all, Jesus' power enabled many to be healed in an immediate way. Look at one example in verses 2 to 3. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately, he was cured of his leprosy. You go back to the Old Testament, there's a time when a person from a foreign country approaches the king of Israel and says, "Look, I've got leprosy, I'm here so that someone in your country can heal me." And the king of Israel is just, what? That's the equivalent of raising someone from the dead. This is a disease that, isn't one that's very, very easy to treat or heal people of. And here is this man with leprosy, and he comes before Jesus. And notice that when Jesus touches him, that immediately the man is healed. It's not a case where Jesus touches him and says, okay, wait over the next 6 months, things will get a bit better, and eventually you'll be healed. No, he is immediately healed. Have a look at verses 5 to 8 for another example of this power. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralysed and in terrible suffering. Jesus said to him, I will go and heal him. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. The centurion is a Roman soldier, and he recognises that Jesus has power to be able to heal his servant who's paralysed and enduring great suffering. And in fact, so great is Jesus' power that the centurion says, you don't even need to come to my place. All you need to do is say the word and it will happen. Now, the centurion will go on to say that the reason why he thinks this is because he, as a centurion, speaks with the authority of the Roman emperor to those who are under him. So if he gives an order, it's the Roman emperor who's giving an order. And if you defy the centurion, you're defying the Roman emperor. Well, remember our first reading that Joe brought to us from Isaiah 35? Remember what was going to happen when God turned up on the scene? Great healings would occur. Now, the centurion might not have understood all of this clearly, but one thing he certainly understood was that Jesus possessed the authority of God. And friends, God only needs to speak and things happen. And so we read in verse 13, then Jesus said to the centurion, go, it will be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that very hour. Here with just words alone, speaking from far away from where this person who is paralysed is, this person is healed. Such is the power of Jesus. And then finally in verses 14 to 16 we read, when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. Peter's mother-in-law has a fever. It's quite likely she had malaria. And she's probably knocked about quite a lot by this fever. She's bedbound, not very active at all. Jesus comes and lays a hand on her, and she's healed straight away. To the extent that she hops straight out of bed and she starts serving people. She's full of energy again. We have this immediacy about Jesus' healing. We see that all who come to him that night who are sick are healed. All are healed. Friends, what we see here with Jesus is this amazing power which brings healing to people in an immediate way. It doesn't matter what type of illness it is. It doesn't matter how hard it might be to cure. Jesus has the power to be able to heal these things. Now, what we also see is that Jesus' power ensured that he was not negatively impacted as he healed people. Have a look at verses 2 to 3 again. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said. Be clean. Immediately he was cured of his leprosy. Back in Jesus' day, it's a very religious society, Israel. And back in this day, the leper would have been an outcast. Because the Old Testament talks about that people who have different skin conditions like leprosy are unclean. They are ritually unclean. And if you're ritually unclean, you're not allowed to participate in the religious activities of that society. Indeed, this man would have walked around saying, "Unclean, unclean, unclean," so that those who are ritually clean would not come into contact with him and make themselves unclean. I want you to imagine what life must have been like for this man. He probably hadn't been touched by anyone for years. No hand on the shoulder, no shaking of hands, no hugs, no kisses. Would have been awful. Now notice, this man knows that Jesus has got the power to heal him. He doesn't doubt that. But what he's wondering is if Jesus is willing to come close to him to effect that healing. If Jesus is willing to do so. What do we see? Jesus was willing. Jesus wasn't worried about the prospect of becoming unclean by having contact with this man. He reaches out and he touches the man. But notice, it's not Jesus who becomes unclean because of the touch. The leper becomes clean. Such is the power of Jesus that as he effects this healing, it doesn't have a negative impact on him, but it has a very positive impact upon the one he touches. And we see something very similar in verses 14 to 15. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. Now, friends, think about our situation today. Why are we wearing masks? Why are we socially distancing? Why are we limiting the numbers of people that can be in our homes today? Why are we limiting the number of people that can be in church? Why aren't we singing in church buildings? Why are we now elbow bumping instead of handshaking? Well, because we're worried we might catch something. We're worried we might catch COVID-19. That's why we're doing it. And this situation here is really no different. Back in those days, if someone had a fever, well, you didn't go near them in case you might get the fever too. But notice that Jesus touches this woman's hand. And he doesn't get sick as a result, but his power enables her to be healed. One of the sad things that has been happening is you hear stories in Australia and of people around the world of medical professionals who are working hard to help people with COVID-19. They take all the appropriate precautions, they wear the appropriate equipment, yet somehow some of them still end up getting sick and suffering because they are trying to help others. But there's no such issue for Jesus. He touches the woman with the fever. He doesn't get sick. He makes her well. Such is his power. So Jesus has this amazing power to heal people in an immediate way. He has this amazing power to heal people in a way whereby he's not negatively impacted at all. It's all positive for those that he interacts with. At this point you might say, so what? That's 2,000 years ago. What's that got to do with now as we experience COVID-19 and all these sorts of things? So what? Well, friends, as we look more deeply at Matthew, what we see is that Jesus' healings pointed forward to the eternal healing his death would provide for many. In Matthew 8:17 we read, this, referring to the healings that Jesus had performed, was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. Here we have a quote from Matthew, from Isaiah 53 verse 4, one of the passages that was read for us a little bit earlier. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. Matthew is saying that as Jesus performs these healings, that he is fulfilling what the prophet Isaiah had been told by God some 700 to 800 years earlier. Isaiah 53 talks about a servant who it seems would provide healing for people. And Matthew says, well, as you see all of these healings, here is Isaiah 53. being fulfilled. Jesus is this person that was spoken of some 700 to 800 years earlier. But what I want you to notice is how Jesus would ultimately bring healing for many people. According to Isaiah 53 verse 5, that next verse in Isaiah, where we read, "But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed." This servant in Isaiah is known as the suffering servant. This is a servant who suffers for the sake of others, so that people might have peace with God and so that people might be healed. Not healed just for a temporary time, but healed permanently. This servant suffers so that people can be healed. Now, friends, ultimately, this suffering that Isaiah 53 is speaking about points to Jesus' death on the cross and the suffering that he endures there. And what I want to suggest to you, friends, is that Matthew is saying to us, well, ultimately, Jesus heals us through his death, and all of these miracles that Jesus performs in Matthew 8 are signs of what his death will achieve for us. They are signs pointing forward to the healing that he will make possible through his death. But how does the death of Jesus bring about permanent healing? Well, there's a couple of things that I need to mention at this point. The first is that our sin, directly or indirectly, leads to illness. Isaiah 53 verse 6a talks about the nature of sin when it says, "We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way." Here we have a metaphor describing God and humanity. God, if you like, is a shepherd, and we are the sheep. God is our maker, and we are meant to be following his lead. But sin is the idea that we say, "No, God, we don't want to follow your lead. We don't want you telling us what to do. We don't want you telling us what is right from wrong, good from evil. We want to do our own thing." And so we go astray. That's what the nature of sin is. And as we go astray and do our own thing, we think things, we say things, we do things that God finds thoroughly offensive. The whole attitude of sin is thoroughly offensive to God. And friends, we are under a curse from God because of that sin. That curse leads ultimately to death. And the path of death involves illness and aging. The reason why there is sickness in the world is because of our sinfulness. Now, friends, generally speaking, if I got COVID-19, we shouldn't necessarily see it as because I've somehow been worse than others. If you have a particularly bad illness, it's really not necessarily a sign that you've somehow been worse than others. Now, the Bible does speak about some rare cases where specific sins lead to specific illnesses, but generally speaking, friends, the reason why certain people get certain illnesses is quite mysterious. But ultimately, the reason why we all suffer with illness, why we all age, why death will confront us all, is because of our sin. And so if you want healing that lasts for an eternity, that is permanent, you've first got to deal with the problem of sin. And what we see is that Jesus' death deals with this underlying cause of our illnesses. It deals with the problem of sin. So Isaiah 53 verse 6b says, "And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." When Jesus died on the cross, he died an innocent man, and our guilt was laid upon him. Jesus in Matthew 20 verse 28 says, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." The idea of the ransom is paying a penalty. All of our guilt was laid upon Jesus on the cross, but so was the penalty we all deserve for our sin. Jesus took it all. He took it all. He endured the hell that we all deserve to endure. And by doing so, he opens up the way for sinners to be washed clean, for sinners to be forgiven. Now remember, sin causes illness and death. If you can deal with the problem of sin, that then means you deal with the problem of illness and death. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't get ill now or that we won't die. No, what Jesus promises through his death is a new life. In the life to come, where sickness is no more, where death is no more, where tears are no more. But through his death, Jesus makes it possible for all of us to have the hope of that life, where we will be healed permanently. But here's the thing. The fact that Jesus died for the sins of the whole world doesn't mean that everyone will be forgiven. It doesn't mean that everyone will experience this permanent healing. No, we have to make a response to what Jesus has done. And what we see is that we only receive healing from Jesus for eternity if we have faith in Jesus. And in Matthew 8, we get some marvellous examples of what faith looks like. In verse 2, a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Notice the certainty of that statement. You can make me clean. Matthew 8, verse 8, the centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed." Notice that both of these people acknowledge that Jesus has the power to do that which they are powerless to do. They acknowledge that reality. Faith involves acknowledging that Jesus has the power to do that which we are powerless to do. But faith is more than just acknowledging something to be true. The book of James talks about how demons believe in God and shudder. They acknowledge that God is all-powerful, but that scares them. True faith involves acknowledging things that are true, but it's more than that. It's asking for help. It's asking Jesus, who has the power, to act for us who are powerless. It's an act of dependence upon Jesus. Please do for me that which I cannot do. Please bring me forgiveness of sins because I cannot deal with that. Please bring me healing because I can't heal myself. Please give me life because I can't raise myself from the dead. That's what true faith involves. And what's remarkable about this story is the people who had faith in Jesus. The leper, who was really an outcast in that society. A Roman centurion, who was not one of God's Old Testament people, the Jews, but an outsider. We have outsiders who have faith in Jesus. And notice those that don't. In Matthew 8, 10 to 12. When Jesus heard this, that is the centurion's profession of faith, he was astonished and said to those following him, "I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. For the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." See, it's the outsider in this passage who has faith, but it's the insiders, the people of Israel, who are lacking faith. Indeed, the religious leaders will have Jesus put to death. Such is their lack of faith. But they should have known better, shouldn't they? They had passages like Isaiah 35 saying that when God comes, great healings will be performed. And here is Jesus doing that. Yet they don't believe. You see, friends, to receive healing from Jesus, you don't have to be from a religious background. You don't have to have come from a Christian family or gone to a Christian school or things like that. You don't have to have people in your family who are somehow religious. No, it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what you have done. If you know that Jesus has the power to forgive you and to heal you, and you come to him and ask for help, he will grant it. And so my question is, do you have faith? That's the question in this passage. Do you have faith? Do you have faith like the leper who says, I know you can. Are you willing? Well, Jesus is willing. Do you have faith like the centurion who says, all you need to do is speak and it's done? See, that's all that is needed to deal with the biggest problem we all have, our sin. Our sin causes illness, aging, death. But Jesus deals with the problem of sin. And with it, he deals with the problem of illness. Yes, vaccines are good things, but ultimately they're temporary things, and they don't deal with all illnesses. Only Jesus has the power to bring permanent healing. Trust in him, and you won't be disappointed.